On July 1st, Dr. John Bierwirth will take over the helm as superintendent of Portland Public Schools. He was selected for the job from a long list of over 100 candidates in a nationwide search. Dr. Bierwirth worked as a teacher and counselor before becoming superintendent in 1981 of the Freeport Union Free School District on Long Island, New York. 2 years ago, he took command of the Sachem District, also on Long Island. At Freeport and Sachem, he gained a reputation for being an energetic and innovative instructional leader. He increased the percentage of students taking rigorous courses in high school, decentralized administration, and gave teachers and parents more control over their schools. While at Sachem, he experienced deep cuts in state aid and proportionate cuts in the district budget. Valuable experience, I'm sure, for the challenge that he will be faced with here on Measure 5. Dr. Bierwirth will discuss his vision of the future, Measure 5, the Katz Plan, and his hopes on mobilizing all parts of the community and district to make Portland's education competitive, measured not only on a national scale, but on international scales as well. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jack Bierwirth to the City Club.
Thank you very much, Patty. It's a real privilege to be here. I'm not used to giving speeches. I much prefer to go and meet with parents or community members or students or teachers and sit down and have a conversation and give and take. But I have got a speech. So that you know how well I'm doing, I have signals arranged with the administrators over there. If the signals start going like this, I'm in trouble. If they start going like that, then I'm supposed to head for the nearest exit. And if they all leave, then you know I'm in real trouble. I also noticed that nobody used the opposed and in favor. If later on people want to ask questions, if you'd stand up, then I'll know where you're coming from before you ask the question. So we'll make some use out of the microphones yet. One of the reasons that I enjoy talking to people rather than giving speeches is that public policy is very complex. It is not something that can be condensed into speeches or 30-second sound bites. And I'm afraid one of the things that's happened in the country over the last 20 years, maybe longer, is that instead of real public policy debates, we have gotten into slogans, bumper stickers, and 30-second sound bites, and use those as a substitute for discussing very serious and critical issues, whether they're abortion or how much we can afford in the way of public services or how good public schools can be. I am therefore a bit nervous about giving a speech which might be excerpted 15 or 20 seconds and have that be my, what shall I say, my punchline for today. However, among us, I would hope that as I get finished with my speech, that you would ask some good questions, some straightforward questions. I enjoy conversation. I enjoy being asked tough questions. I don't enjoy just sort of being handed soft ones. I know I don't have to tell you this, but Portland is a wonderful city. My wife Jane and I are looking forward to living here, and we believe that this is a great place to raise our family. Our two oldest, who are 10 as of 2 days from now, and 6, have had a chance to visit and have given the city their solid seal of approval. My son, who knew nothing about basketball, instantly became a Blazers fan and was severely disappointed when they lost the last game. I know that it was tough for the city here, but I didn't expect my 6-year-old, who I don't think really knew much about basketball, to get that involved that quickly. I should also tell you that the reception that we have received has been nothing short of extraordinary. I have received numerous letters from a wide variety of people. Everyone has been encouraging, friendly, helpful, and just plain nice. It has been the kind of reception that makes you feel that you really did make the right decision. I'm also honored and a bit humbled to be walking in the footsteps of Matt Prophet. I have followed his career from afar for a number of years, and over the past couple of months, as I have gotten to know more about Portland, my impressions have been completely confirmed. Matt Prophet is one of America's great educational leaders. As I have come to know more about Portland, I have also been extremely impressed with the quality of people working for the district. I have met some extraordinarily talented people, very dedicated to their jobs, spilling over with good ideas, and deeply committed to doing whatever is necessary to help students succeed. Now the big question. Can it be done? Can we simultaneously improve the quality of education, something which I believe is an absolute necessity, and do so with somewhat restricted financial resources? The answer, I believe, is yes. It will not be easy, but I would not be here if I did not believe that it was possible. While I have been more than willing to take risks professionally, I am not willing to risk the education of my own children. They and the 57,000 other children in Portland Public Schools need and deserve the best. The reason for my feeling is the extraordinary level of support for quality education, which I have found among all segments of the Portland community. That support is critical. While I would love to see a solution to the present crisis appear miraculously, it would certainly make my life a lot easier. I know that there will always be another crisis somewhere off in the future. If there is strong support for good schools within a community, solutions will always be found sooner or later. If the support is not there, one of those crises will eventually prove fatal. We have another thing going for us. The district is in solid shape, both educationally and financially. Moreover, the district is clearly not resting on its laurels, but moving aggressively to provide an even better education for the children of Portland. While I have a lot to learn about Portland, there are a number of things which I feel are critical to our success in the future. It would be wonderful if we had some miracles and all of our financial problems were solved and students instantly achieved at much higher levels. The reality is, however, that most miracles don't happen. They're made. And how is this going to be done? Several thoughts. One, higher expectations. Good enough is not good enough. It never was, and it certainly isn't now. The academic achievement of students in Portland is impressive, but it needs to be a lot better. The standard should not be achievement in other cities, achievement in schools around us, or achievement even in other countries. It should instead be what we inherently know students are capable of if they could reach their full potential. I'd like to give you an example of something that I think can be done to make that a reality. In New York State, there are two diplomas, a higher level Regents diploma and a regular diploma. Typically, 40% of a district's graduates receive a Regents diploma. This past year, the staff in my former district came up with what they called the Regents Challenge Program. They challenged students and parents to take higher level courses. Course structures and teaching methodologies were changed, but the standards were not lowered. The Regents exams are given statewide, and they are the same whether you're in the Adirondacks, in New York City, or on Long Island. The response was phenomenal. In 1 year, the percentage of students in the 9th grade taking Regents level courses jumped from 55-60% to 85-90%. Portland has undertaken similar initiatives. They must be expanded to all students and pursued aggressively. We need every part of the community to feel passionately about the fact that expectations need to be raised. Second, outcomes and not process. For most of the time since the Second World War, my profession has assumed that if we told schools how, when, where, what, etc. to teach, that the results would naturally follow. Unfortunately, they haven't. We told teachers how to teach U.S. history. We told them when to teach it. We gave them the textbooks. But unfortunately, kids don't know anywhere near as much about U.S. history as they should. We must shift from a focus on educational process and instead focus on outcomes. First, we need to define specific skills and knowledge we expect of students on a district-wide level. We should then give individual schools and within them individual teachers much more flexibility in terms of how they achieve these goals. If one teacher teaches long division through flying kites and another by looking at bugs in a field, it does not make a difference as long as all students learn how to do long division. Interesting parenthetical note. One of the problems with focusing on results is that we have only limited ways in which to assess what we really want students to know. Unfortunately, this proves my point. As a nation, we are way behind in assessing what we really want students to know and do because we invested so little in this area over the past 40 years. However, we should not delay in focusing on outcomes instead of process just because we have those limitations. Oregon is way ahead of the rest of the country in this area. It is one of the things that attracted me to Portland. House Bill 3565 and Oregon benchmarks are but two examples. Both recognize that education needs to achieve specific goals, and that those goals must be achieved without hesitation. There are details that will be argued about, and I am sure we will encounter problems. But there can be mid-course corrections. However, that is beside the point. The key point is that the state and the city are committed to moving forward in a serious, specific manner. If you look around the country, state after state, area after area is still talking about what should be done, and they are not moving. We have had 10 years of reports. People are still sitting around, and we have not moved. I would rather be moving and talk about whether the direction that we're moving in is the right one or needs some corrections than not to be moving at all. We need action. 3, empowerment of principals and teachers. Hand in hand with a greater focus on outcomes must be dramatically increased empowerment of principals and teachers. Buildings should be given much greater flexibility and latitude in how they go about achieving the goals which have been agreed to on a district-wide level. And departments and individual teachers should be given greater flexibility in achieving building goals. As part of this process, we should expect a greater number of failures, ideas that did not work. That doesn't bother me in the slightest, because the real shame is not in failing, but not in trying. As the quality of education increases, incremental improvements become more and more difficult to achieve. To get the dropout rate down to 0, to get all students to read, etc., is going to take the collective brain power of all of our staff. I like to think that I have a lot of good ideas, and I always want to get my 2 cents in. But significant progress at this point will not come from one individual or a handful of people, but from unleashing as many people as possible. 4, parental involvement. We need real, substantial parental involvement in the educational process. While it is sometimes frustrating to have lay people deeply involved in schools, I would gladly accept that if that is the hook necessary to get parents to take much greater responsibility for their children's education. One of the great ironies of the current scene is that poll after poll of parents indicates that they believe that education is in bad shape across the country, but that their child and their school is average to excellent. Polls of students show parallel findings. I just saw one a month ago. Students were asked how well they were doing. Almost every one of them said just fine. The reality is that in almost all cases, achievement could and should be a lot better. Some of what we need parents to do is quite simple. A month ago, a national study indicated that students who watch less than 3 hours of television a day, 3 hours a day, do better in school. I hear a lot of talk about the need to, quote, break the mold. I am as excited as anybody about that. But let's not overlook the fact that we could get students to read at a lot higher levels if they simply read more and watched TV less. We need parents to make that happen. And if drawing them into the schools and giving them more power, and in fact making my life maybe a little more difficult by giving them some real policy making in schools, if that's the hook that we need to get them to take more responsibility for their children's education, then we have to do it, because we are not going to get a whole lot better. I recognize the problems with that. It is not easy being accountable and being involved with thousands of people, but let's do it. 5, and I've rewritten my comments, we need to deal with a financial crisis. We clearly have a problem. It's over the horizon at this point, but it's there. We are going to have to deal legislatively, politically, economically, in terms of the district, with the financial potential financial shortfalls for the school district and for other areas of public service. There are a number of critical questions. It is over the hill. It is abstract. How do we get people to understand that what's over the hill and abstract could become real without it becoming real? My perspective on this has changed as my kids have gotten older. As a superintendent, I am paid to think 3 to 5 years out into the future. But my children are experiencing life on a year-to-year basis. And in my youngest daughter's case, it's a week-to-week basis. A week is a long time for her. I know, based upon discussions with people and my innate sense of where people are in any place in the country, that if a disaster were to happen, that people would draw back and say, no, this was not what we want. This is not what we intended. The question is, before the disaster happens, can we discuss it in a reasonable and rational way when it's only abstract, before kids have to pay a price for that? Do we have to have children like my children lose by having a class of 35, or lose services, or not be able to participate in a dramatic production in order to make it clear that those things are important and that the consequences of our actions as adults was to cost them those things? One of the things that you will find about me is that I tend to be bluntly and perhaps brutally honest. I have felt that if you give people information in a straightforward fashion, provide them with the data that they need, that most of the time people will make intelligent decisions. I also realize, and I feel a lot of pressure on myself at this point and over the next couple of months, because I realize that people are going to be hanging on my words and the words of the Board of Education and the other people who are deeply involved in the school district. The question is, can we put this abstract crisis, which is off in the future, frame it in a proper perspective, tell people exactly what it means in clear and straightforward and simple terms, allow them to evaluate that, and then make the decisions that they need about what they can afford and what they can't afford in terms of both finances on one hand and services on another. Now, I'll talk about where I'm coming from. To me, the heart of education is the classroom teacher and what goes on inside of the classroom, the relationship between a teacher and a student. I am as much in favor of computers as anybody. In fact, the district where I was in before the one where I am now, Freeport, I'm in Sachem now, was probably 15 years ahead of most of the rest of the United States. There were hundreds of computers in the Freeport School District almost 20 years ago, before most people had even heard of them. It was an incredible district. It was a poor district, but it had computers and it had preschool education long before most people were focusing on those things. However, throw aside textbooks, throw aside computers, the heart of education is the relationship between a teacher and a child, my child and the other 57,000. That, first and foremost, is what we have to protect. In fact, I'd like to see class sizes lowered. I think they're a bit too high here. We must start with that, and we must look at what else is provided. I do not see cutting into classroom services. I do not want to see class sizes raised. And beyond that, we're going to have to look at what we can afford and what we can't afford. As I said, I think that people will find me ruthlessly, brutally honest about what those things are. I'm willing to engage in discussion. I want to engage in discussion. It is, however, going to be very difficult for me, A, to learn fast enough, and B, to get around fast enough over the next couple of months. But I will do my best. I don't really see any other choice. And my belief is that if we can give people that information and provide a process by which those things can be discussed reasonably, rationally, and openly, and if possible, dispassionately, and that will not be easy when we're talking about people's jobs on one hand and people's children on another. People's children tend to be a fairly emotional discussion, emotional subject, and it's very difficult for people to be dispassionate about that. But that is what we will need to engage in. And I would ask you, as I have asked parents and I have asked other people that I've met with so far since I have been back and forth a couple of times, to do what you can to aid in that process. Try to keep people focused on discussing things reasonably and rationally. There's one other thing, and I didn't realize, but it's related to something else. The elimination of the gap in achievement between students of different races and ethnic groups. We cannot move ahead as a school district, as a city, or as a society unless we all move ahead. We cannot have, and I hope I'm quoting this correctly, quote, a stream of plenty and a stream of want. It is wrong, and it should and can be eliminated if we are all willing. I have seen many articles nationally recently talking about the skills and training of minority students and the need to improve those skills because we will become more dependent upon them early in the next century to support us in our old age. I realize that some people do not move unless they believe it is in their own self-interest. But really, we must eliminate the gap because it is the right thing to do, and because to the extent that we accept less for others, we lessen ourselves. Portland is a great city, one that I am excited and proud to become part of. I am looking forward to exploring, and I have learned that all I have to do is ask, and I get dozens of suggestions about places to go. Portland has much to be proud of in its schools. The challenge is not to preserve that, but to use it as a springboard to show people in this state and people in the country what can and must be done to make America what it should be. Thank you.
We'll have our first question from Mary McWilliams.
Welcome to Portland and to City Club. Dr. Bierwirth, I'd like to follow up on your last comment about differences in educational attainment among students and how you would see to bring us all to that level of aspiration that you think that we can attain.
I think we have to do a number of things. First, we have to be honest about it. If there are differences in achievement, we have to recognize them, talk about them in a straightforward fashion, and say, look, this is real. The second thing is that we have to be serious in wanting to do something about it. I think I would have answered the question slightly differently or with a slightly different illustration than I'm going to give you now. But yesterday, as I was coming out on the plane, I was struck by an incredible article on the front page of the New York Times. Disneyland sent recruiters into South Central Los Angeles to recruit summer workers for Disneyland. And the article indicated that they were surprised to find that there were people in South Central Los Angeles interested in working in Disneyland. The article indicated also that they were surprised that not only did they find the interest, but they found young people with the kinds of skills and training that they were looking for. The parallel is this. I don't think, some of this is very difficult. Some of this is very difficult, and it's intertwined with a lot of areas: employment, housing, drugs. But some of it is also very simple. Nationally, there have been studies which find that a lot of students drop out simply because nobody asked them to stay in. I found in Sachem, in terms of raising expectations, that there was a greater willingness on the part of parents and students to try more difficult courses simply because we asked them. Now, I have to take a lot of blame on that myself. I'm a professional educator. I've now been in this 20 years, and I'm now realizing that I too have been guilty of some of the same things that I am in effect accusing my whole profession of, which is that we must pursue these things. And I think we have to pursue them as a city, as a society, and as an educational system. We also need to focus on outcomes. And if there are kids, whether they're minority kids or kids who for other reasons are not succeeding, we need to say that when you get to X point and you have not achieved those skills, then we need to pull out all stops to make it happen for you. That's my best answer at the moment. Now, you're standing up in front of the in favor. Is that good?
I was hoping that you would have noticed that. The second friendly question, Jack, from the Education Committee of the City Club. Your intent to mobilize all parts of the community and district in order to make Portland's educational system not only competitive but premier is admirable. How do you intend to gain this cooperation and mobilization? And from what you've seen so far, what would be the single most significant barrier to that eventual mobilization and cooperative effort?
Let me answer the last part of that first. My concern is that there's a great deal of confusion. And I'm going to talk mostly on the financial side because I think the educational side is a little bit easier to deal with. There is a great deal of confusion in terms of Measure 5, what the significance of it is financially, where we stand, what the impact of it will be. And my concern is that as people become more confused, that they will tend to turn us off. We need to be clear and straightforward about it. I know that if they become confused, we will lose. I think that it is our chance to lose. I think that the community will give us a chance to find solutions, and that it is our chance to blow. How am I going to do that? Which answers the first part of your question. First, I'm going to get out as much as I can to every group in this community that will have me and talk about it. And I will talk as openly and honestly and straightforwardly as I can about where I see us and what I think the ramifications of certain decisions will be, and appeal to their intelligence and common sense about whether those ramifications in terms of finances or cuts in services or changes in services or different ways is what they believe in or not. I think people rise to the occasion if you can provide them with the information and a process by which to think about those things. It will not be easy, A, because I'm new and I have an awful lot to learn, and it's going to be as difficult for me initially because I'm not going to be able to give people the kinds of answers that I'd like to. The second, and I'm a little bit concerned about this because I'm not much into symbolism. I don't like to do things only for symbolic value or for even partially symbolic value. But clearly the district is going to have to show its commitment to finding ways of reducing its expenses, becoming more efficient in both straightforward ways and in innovative ways, working with other governmental agencies, working with other school districts, and we're going to have to show that fairly quickly so that even if we can't do very much, people have the sense that we're moving in a direction that they feel makes sense. The hard part is that people want to be shown, and clearly if I understand the timetable of political action correctly, we may well be facing some critical decisions as a city and as a state in the relatively near future. It will be difficult to give people a whole lot of very solid actions based upon some rationale. I can do some things quickly that would be symbolic, but that would completely undercut what I would also be trying to say to people, which is that we are looking at things and making reasonable and rational decisions. If I make a decision on the 6th of July, I'm clearly not doing it on the basis of having looked into things and tried to make tried to make it on a reasonable and rational basis. I'm doing it as symbol, and I don't like that. But people are going to want to see action. Yes.
Richard Pope, member from Portland, Oregon.
I know.
That. Okay. This is not perhaps a question you'd like to hear. Do you think that the public school system ought to rely only on property taxation for its funding?
No. I told you I'd be honest.
Argument.
I haven't figured out a perfect system. I've been working with a group of superintendents that have been trying to reform New York State's system of funding education. It is far worse than Oregon's. It is, I'm not going to get it close. Not having blown it once. That formula is 20 pages long. It is a financial and political question. My sense here, however, is that we have a better shot than probably almost any place else in the country, because there are a larger number of people who know more and who are more involved in public policy debate and discussion than you can find almost any place else in the United States. Yeah.
Ted Kay, City Club member. You wanted tough questions. I was going to ask you how to spell potato.
Just as long as it's not how to pronounce the state.
But on a more serious side, I'd asked you to...
I don't know, I think that's pretty serious.
In the realm of something you can do something about, I'd like to hear your opinion on the Katz bill, the Katz plan.
Well, I was referring indirectly to a lot of it in my speech, my prepared remarks. I've come to many of the same conclusions. I'm not going to focus on all aspects of the bill. I was reminded this morning that there are a lot more to it than some of the things I focused on. But I've come to many of the same conclusions that I assume that the people who framed it did. And it's politically correct, I guess, not to quibble with some of the details. But I love getting into arguments, and I will quibble with the details. But put the details aside. The good parts of it are this, and I want to go back to two of the things that I said. A is outcomes. It focuses on standards and outcomes and not on educational process, and doesn't say, look, these are the prescribed curricula, and if you do those things, everything will be perfect. It says, we got to have action, and here are some attainable goals, things that we think make sense. In that sense, I make it parallel to the Oregon benchmarks, which I found fascinating and was really impressed with. And the second side of it says that we need to decentralize. It is very easy for a superintendent to come into a school district that's a disaster. And if there's, say, 40% of the students dropping out, lower that to 20%. You can make some unilateral decisions and you're a great hero. But to get from 95% of the students graduating to 97% of the students graduating is probably as difficult as getting from 50 to 70. And I've come to the conclusion that that is only going to happen if we get teachers and parents and principals to get deeply involved in identifying what the problems are, coming up with solutions, and then seeing whether those solutions work, being held accountable for them. Accountable on their own and accountable from someplace outside. Changing the role of the superintendent, the Board of Education, from the fount of all wisdom to being the place that provides direction, support, provides the rules of the game, says these are the parameters in which you shall operate, and then, if you will, scorekeeper, and says, hey, you aren't meeting the things that we need to meet. There are other areas there that I'm also excited about. The focus on early childhood education, which is going to cost some money, but I think in the long run will be an incredible investment for our society. Lengthening the school day. I could go on. They make a great deal of sense. My district, the one that I was in before, Freeport, was the first district in the state of New York, and for 10 years the only district in the state of New York to have programs for 4-year-olds open to every 4-year-old in the community. It was not a rich district, but they made the decision that it was a good investment. And I saw it pay off over and over and over again. I was lucky enough to go to France. We had an exchange program in Freeport with a community in France, 5th grade students. And I went over there and I had a chance to see what I'd been reading about in terms of the publicly financed education for 2-, and 3-, and 4-year-olds. It is far from perfect. I saw class sizes of 30 and 35 with one teacher who had one 15-minute break for the whole day. But I had an interesting debate with those teachers. I told them about what we were doing in Freeport and what the regulations required. And we had an interesting discussion. Were they better off with a less than adequate program, but having it, than we were with ideal rules but no programs? And the problem is this. If you look across the United States, who is it who's getting access to early childhood education? It's children from families like mine and yours, affluent families, families that typically have more people working in the household, make more money, have a stable household with books in them and whatever else. The families whose children are not going to nursery schools and early childhood education are the families of the poor, the people who are at risk, the people who are in trouble. If you take it in an extreme, and New York City is a case of extremes, the average affluent child in New York City has probably been in nursery school since the age of 2 and goes to a private school with an entry date of September for girls and June for boys. The average poor child arrives in New York City public schools probably not having been involved in an educational program as until they hit kindergarten. And with a cutoff date in the public schools of December 1st, they are on average 6 months younger. Now really, can we as a society reasonably expect the children from affluent families with 3 years more education before the age of kindergarten and 6 months older are going to be equal by the time they come out the other end with kids who are younger and haven't had the education? Now, I don't see the extremes here, but as a society, we really got to do something about that. And I applaud the Katz bill in moving in that direction. That makes a lot of sense. It's going to be difficult to fund, but I think that the educational value in what we will achieve long range, not having extra remedial services, not having kids drop out as much, will probably more than pay for itself. The hard part is going to be to come up with it in the first place. Yes.
Dick Lewis, City Club member. I have a kind of philosophical question. You said early in your remarks that the important question that the community and the educational system faces, or one of them, is to say what it is that children should learn. And I know you mean to get at that through consultation with teachers and parents and others, but if we were having a conversation, I guess I'd ask, what should kids know?
In what area and by when? That's a long, long conversation. I think too long for here. I have my feelings about it. I want to have discussions with other professionals and with parents about what they have. And one of the reasons for getting parents involved is if they talk about it and are involved in setting what those things are, then they'll be more committed to making sure that their kids achieve those. You know, what do we expect kids to be able to write by the end of 5th grade? Do we expect them to be able to write 4 sentences reasonably intelligently, 2 paragraphs reasonably intelligently? What really do we expect? I don't think we were very good at answering that. We're great at developing curricula. We're lousy at defining what it is we really want out of kids. And we got to do an awful lot more of that. And the difficulty will be that for a period of time, after we've defined those goals, we will probably not have all the kinds of measures that we want. It's easy enough to measure whether kids can do long division. It is not so easy to measure whether a child really understands what long division is all about. Uh-oh.
I have a very friendly question. How do you go about recruiting inspirational teachers when you're faced with barriers of getting a license by going to some educational class that removes the inspiration?
Well, I'll bring that home. I have to take the NTE in order to be certified in the state. Can't be certified. I can't be certified in this state until I take the NTE. And I mean, I don't mean to take on the bureaucracy all by myself, and I won't. I'm going to take the NTE and get that out of the way. But it is a serious problem, and I've been part of it in New York State, and I will make myself part of it here. I've been on, I don't remember the name of the board here, but it's the Teachers Education Standards Practices Board, and we've been working very hard to change that. It's been I'm frustrated leaving it. I've been doing it for 5 years, and I think we're close to making a significant change in the state of New York. And what we are focusing on is outcomes, what we expect in terms of ability and knowledge, rather than what courses you took and what place you went to in order to achieve those, or how you achieved them. You know, what do we want teachers to know in terms of U.S. history? What do we want teachers to know in terms of writing, math, so on? And if you can figure out a way of demonstrating that, then you should be able to teach in the schools. A Rhodes Scholar can't teach in this city or any other city just because they happen to be a Rhodes Scholar. They've got to go take an education course, and they've got to take some other things. Now, I'm not knocking education courses, because a Rhodes Scholar does need to learn something about pedagogy. Just because you know everything about U.S. history does not necessarily make you a great U.S. history teacher. There is knowledge to be learned. But it's got to be done in a lot better way now, and it's got to not turn people off the way it does. I wouldn't be in education today if I had not been offered an opportunity to go to the University of Massachusetts School of Education. I went in there. I was fortunate enough to meet a man who was absolutely crazy, and I had a great education, and I really learned something, and I'm here today because of that. I would like to be able to create those opportunities for other people. Yes.
You've mentioned a lot of partnerships today, getting I'm Eric Fishman, City Club member, getting parents involved.
What if you're not a City Club member? What happens?
Then they throw you out the window.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty harsh here in Oregon.
I thought maybe there's a trap door there or something.
You mentioned a lot of partnerships, getting parents involved in the schools, talking with students, other government agencies, other school districts, and I know that public funding is a major part of the problem. What about all of us in the room that are private sector folks? What kind of partnerships do you see or envision, and what kind of needs do you see from the business community to invest in education?
Thank you for the question. You know, there's a lot of things that I'd like to talk about, and I wouldn't want anybody to walk away assuming that just because I haven't talked about something, I don't have some interest. I want a lot. Maybe not the things that you expect. I don't particularly want money. I want an environment of support, which I've seen, and I probably wouldn't have come if I hadn't seen it. The leadership roundtable, the Leaders Roundtable, other things like that clearly indicate to me that people who are involved outside of education are interested in our success. I need that. I also need people to become involved in a way, and I'll use some examples. I've been involved with a project setting up school business partnerships on Long Island, and we now have almost every high school on Long Island involved with a business. In those partnerships, we have not focused on money, And we have not focused on the traditional kinds of things which businesses have given school districts. Tutoring help, other things like that, where they bring employees in. Those are wonderful. Mentoring, if people are willing to give their time, I think are absolutely fantastic. But what I'm even more interested in are some things like this. The corporation that we're involved with in Sachem right now is called Cybex. If some of you have had to have physical rehabilitation, you've probably used some of their machines. It's a computer with a box on it and some arms, and if you need, well, I had it on my shoulders. If you need to have your knees or your back or your arms, it's their equipment. They're in most of the hospitals. They are rolling out a new piece of equipment this spring. And they have given that equipment, and they are working with the introduction of that equipment with a number of our classes. The marketing class is working with their marketing department on their actual marketing plans for that piece of equipment. Our graphics classes, which is sort of a quasi-business, quasi-art class, is working on what the logos, the design, the colors will look like. It's a real problem. The machine has been given to our phys ed classes to be used day, night, adults, whatever. We broke one of the pedals within the first week. They were on one hand upset, on the other hand they were very pleased because they would rather have us break it than have it go out to the health clubs and the physical fitness places and have it break there. It was a real solution. Our pre-engineering classes are working with them on how they did the engineering and how they're going to continue to upgrade it. They're getting something from the district and from those students, but our students are getting something real in return. We're not having those people come in and talk about geometry or U.S. history or things that they're not professionally trained to do. They're coming in and talking about the things that they know how to do and that they're doing right now, so they can get kids excited and they can give kids real problems. Another school district down the road from me is called Brentwood. They're partnered with the Entenmann's Bakery Company. I'm not sure whether they've come this far west. They've been partnered for a number of years. One example of what's come out of that is that they gave their marketing class a project to come up with a new product. And they let the kids think up, design, figure out how to market a new product, and then made them present it to whatever part of the company approves new products. And the kids came up with a product, I don't remember what it was, but I think it was some kind of cookie. And the company is now selling it. Think about the impact on those kids. They had a real problem, and they can now go virtually any place in the United States where Entenmann's cookies are being sold and see what they had to do. That's what I want businesses to do. Yeah.
Bob Shoemaker, member. I'd like to bring you back to the Katz bill. One of the key pieces of that is what some people call tracking, perhaps unfairly, but it's to recognize along the way that some kids are destined for academic training and other kids are perhaps destined for what we call vocational training. And that's the piece of the bill that has a lot of people very upset. Now, I don't know whether you've had a chance to reflect on the bill and the whole IRA magazine or approach to this. I imagine you have had. But I'd like your comments on that part of it and what the district might do in that regard.
I've certainly had a chance to reflect on this subject. Anybody who's in education who has been looking at where we're headed has had to look at the issue. And I've had some chance to look at the bill, but take my comments with a little bit of a caveat because I don't know it in detail. I don't philosophically have a problem with kids at some point being divided between those who are going for vocational training and those who are headed off toward further academic training. However, the caveat to that has got to be to make sure that kids are not tracked in the sense of pushed, that some adult is not saying to them, this is the track you should be on, and steer them in the either against their will or more likely in default. I've wrestled with this, and I really have some personal as well as professional concerns about it. But what I think is even worse is to allow what's happening now to continue, which is that we have kids drop out unprepared for either, or we have kids who graduate not having any idea where they're going or what they're doing or prepared to go anywhere from there. And that seems to me, if you take all the pluses and minuses and add up all the pros and cons and all the caveats, that to me is worse than trying to do something like what's in the bill. So while I have my reservations, I would rather head that direction with our eyes open and our hearts, I think, on the right concerns than not do anything at all. It does encourage me that, as I understand it, the branch point is sufficiently far along in a student's career so that I think they're old enough to start making some of their own choices. I am not comfortable with the European system where students are divided at a much earlier age, much earlier age. That is not what the United States is about, and that's not something that I believe in. There should always be opportunities for students to move and change and grow. If students are tracked as they are in many European countries from the time that they're in, say, the 6th grade or the 8th grade, that's too early. There's adults making choices for kids, and we've got to at least move it far enough along. Is this the right point? Is this the right way? No, not necessarily. It will probably not be, but it's at least, I think, headed in the right direction. Yes?
Paul Melius, also a City Club member. Given that early childhood education and early intervention in children's educational lives has been demonstrated, I think, by the research and by practical experience over and over again that this is the direction that we need to head to get better outcomes at the high school graduation end. How will you get businesses and the community better involved in that aspect of it? Pretty easy to get them when they're already doing industrial design and mechanical drawing and marketing and so on, to have a company come in and say, here, let's do this together. How are you going to get them involved before there's such an obvious connection between what the company's doing and what the kids need?
In the sense of becoming deeply involved in the kids' education, I think that's a waste of their time. We need their support to introduce programs like that, and they need to see it to be of some value. I do believe that there's an interconnection there, a bridge that we can use, and that's the issue of daycare. Clearly, most people, most adults in most households have to work, or want to work, or both. Therefore, people need daycare. And if we could convince people that daycare is necessary and that early childhood education in the public schools, or some amalgam of both, is valuable, I think we can get the business community to go along, because they recognize they're responsive to their employees. Most employers understand what's on their kids' minds. I mean, on their employees' minds. And I think as a generation moves along, where you have in positions people with younger children, we're getting more and more sympathy toward the need to provide for young kids. That's where I get the businesses involved. Yeah.
Bill Crane, City Club member. I'd like you to speak to the importance that you feel about children having music study and art study, particularly learning to sing, to read music notes, to draw, to act, real art making.
Do I denote a little bit of self-interest in that question? What importance do I attach to it? A lot. It's not a frill. And in many cases, it's also a great way to teach kids how to do some basics. It's also an interesting way to do some other things. We had a terrific cultural arts program in Freeport, where I was. We had visiting artists come in. And there had been visiting artists before I got there. And after I got there, I sort of asked people to assess what we were doing. And it was interesting because we all felt that it was really limited, and we were spending a lot of time and not getting much out of it. Typical program, bring performances in, and I hope I'm not knocking your program, but if I am, I told you I'd be honest. You know, typical program, you bring in artists, they do a performance in front of the kids go home, and mom and dad say, what happened in school today? He says, I think I had an opera singer. I think I had an opera singer. And it lasts for one day. I mean, it's great. The kid had a performance, they learn a little bit about opera, but it goes. Far better, we found, was to have an opera singer come in and spend 2 or 3 days in the school going into the classrooms. You can get into reading, you can get into some other things. And what I also found that was a lot of fun was we started bringing in unusual people. You want kids to know about, in a community like that, which was basically 1/3 black, 1/3 white, 1/3 Hispanic, we wanted kids to experience a variety of art forms from different cultures. But we would also do things like bring in white jazz groups. And we had the Brooklyn Philharmonic, which is probably as racially and sexually integrated as you can, Philharmonic orchestra as you can find in the United States. We had them come in so that kids could see that there were black violinists in Philharmonic orchestras as well as white jazz musicians. And, you know, we didn't just have white jazz musicians, but we tried to do a variety of things so that people could see the diversity of life and understand that there were a wider variety of role models out there than the traditional stereotypes even. It was very exciting, and I think kids learned a lot. And if my kid were talented in music, the opportunity to perform at the end of a week of an internship with the Brooklyn Philharmonic on stage would be one of those once-in-a-lifetime things. And probably if I was thinking about it as a career, might be the kind of thing that would cement me into that as a profession.
I think we could go on all day here, but we will take this one last question to wrap it up.
Steve Buckstein, City Club member. Doctor, you mentioned that one thing that affluent families like the ones in this room have, as opposed to poor families here in Oregon and everywhere else, is access to early childhood education. But
more
there's
access.
More access. There's something else that I think is important that we have access to that poor families, say in Portland, don't, and that's a choice of where our children go to school. If we can afford it, we can move into any neighborhood we want. We can send our children to private school. Poor families have no option. They're basically stuck near the public school.
You can also move out of the city.
That's right.
That's right. Necessarily an option.
Poor families generally can't do that. Most of the educational establishment seems to be opposed to seriously looking at choice options for poor families. I'm wondering if you're, I should put it the other way positively, how open you are to looking at providing choice to poor families, the same kind of choice that these affluent families already have.
I think it depends on what kind of choice you're talking about. I've always believed in choice, and 20 years ago I was involved with a project that was setting up alternative schools and looking at voucher plans, public voucher plans across the United States. I still believe in those things. I think that kids should have choices. I think it's good for schools, good for teachers. What I'm not in favor of is what Bush and a number of other people are pushing, which is choice where you can pick up and move and send your kids to private schools. I'm also very concerned about the Edison project because I believe that what will be left as a practical matter is that the public schools, or what's left of the public schools, whatever you want to call them, will be left educating the highest risk kids, the poorest, the special education kids, the places that nobody else would take. Because if you really have choice like they're talking about, but they don't want to talk about this kind of aspect, you've got to have the ability to throw a child out. I mean, you've got to be able to say, no, you didn't perform up to standards, you don't really meet it here. Who's going to go to those schools? It's going to make it worse. There should be choice within the public schools. And there may even, I think there's even some value to having choice between one public school system and another. The mechanics of that are difficult to work out, but I think they can be worked out. But what I'm not in favor of is a lock, stock, and barrel dismantling of the public education and a commitment to providing quality education to all kids that I think is under the surface represented by some of the voucher plans that I've heard discussed on a national level. We're going to end up with much greater divisions, much worse practical segregation than we have now. Because once again, people who have the ability to move and muscle out and whatever else will have the choices. And sure, some poor people will have a choice of a private school.